It seems that one of the fears coming out of this congressional election is the worry that there'll be more political interference in the affairs of the Fed. But that's dramatically different from what we used to see through the Clinton era, the Greenspan era, when the Fed was sort of treated as sacrosanct.
We've gone a long way from the early days of the Fed, around the World War I period, when the Fed was there to ensure liquidity in panics and to retain the value of the currency. After World War II, we picked up a little more mission, which was job growth, or at least full employment. And over time, particularly in the Greenspan years, it became the sort of go-to institution for all things economic. By its very definition, there is a political element to all those factors. It affects people, it affects businesses, it affects employment, it affects the currency. But there's another level, which is what's happened post-crisis, and which tends to happen after many economic breakdowns, which is the population, the establishment, the politicians, they lose confidence in the Fed, and they begin to question whether they should make the call rather than the Fed. It was made a little worse, not only by the financial crisis this time, but also by the fact that the Fed was so aggressively active. Ben Bernanke proved to be very active, and he formed a very close partnership with Treasury, beginning with the Bear Stearns problem. And that partnership brought him into a sphere that was not the old Fed. It was more public.
How much do you think the relative weakness of the Fed, if you will, has to do with Bernanke's personality versus Greenspan's?
I think it has less to do with their personalities and more to do with the economic times in which they are in power. I mean, Ben Bernanke had the bad luck to take office as the mortgage bubble was bursting. Alan Greenspan presided over many years of better economic times. The underlying truth of all this is that no one complains about the Fed when things are going well.
One of the things Greenspan did so effectively was to speak cryptically from this like Delphic position that he had in a way that sort of obscured what the Fed did. Bernanke, on the other hand, had sort of pushed this idea of more transparency. Do you think that that's worked against him?
I mean, it was sort of interesting to watch when Bernanke at one point went out and began to do town halls. And people were asking, well, I don't even know what the Fed is. It's a complicated situation for any Fed chairman. And it's interesting, too, Bernanke's an academic who's been thrust into this almost political role. In order to protect the autonomy, to depoliticize the Fed, in a sense, he's got to be more political.